I don't know if you remember Ralph Nader. He
Yeah.
said basically that capitalism will never die because socialism comes to resuscitate it. And he was referring to the Wall Street
Yes.
$1 billion bailout and all that. But now we have the green economics where all the big corporations are producing green products, and they're making cars that will pollute a little bit less than the old ones. So is technology in a way changing the demise of the ecology? So capitalism will perhaps continue to transform itself and live forever.
Well, that's the illusion of what I would call the technological fundamentalists, the people who believe that all human problems can be solved by the greater application of this high energy, high technology. Paradoxically, they believe that even problems caused by previous technology will be solved by new technology. Well, the problem with that fundamentalism, like all fundamentalism, is it's based on faith, not on evidence. And I think the fact that historically, during the industrial era, there have been incredible advances in technology does not demonstrate that every human problem can be solved by technology. The problem that most obviously defies this technological fundamentalism is global warming and climate change.
Some people think that we're addicted to energy, and we can't reverse it because our reptilian brain is stronger than our reasoning part of the brain, and therefore we're doomed to extinction.
Well, that may well be true. I mean, there's no guarantee that our species is somehow a permanent fixture on the planet, but you and I and everyone else has no way to, number one, know whether that's true, and if it is true, what the time frame for that will be. It may well be that the human with the big brain, the 1350 cubic centimeter brain that we have, which has allowed us to manipulate the world in such dramatic ways, it may be true that our brain isn't sufficient to solve the problems we've created. But I do know one thing, that end of the human species isn't going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen 10 years from now. It's going to be over a long period of time. And that all of our best moral and theological traditions have at their core one thing, which is the centrality of love and compassion. So even if the human species is on the way out in the big picture, we still have an obligation to each other, and I think also to the larger living world, to try and understand our situation and cope as best we can. Now, there's no guarantee that will be successful, but certainly I think if one wants to claim to be a moral agent, to be a decent human being, we have an obligation to try. Remember that there are people suffering today, and as the ecological crises deepen, that suffering will deepen, and we have an obligation to ourselves and each other to try and mitigate that suffering in any way we can.
Now, you mentioned some solutions to it, because it's good to point at the problem, but we also need to have some alternatives. So what is the alternative to capitalism?
Well, I don't believe that it's reasonable to expect anyone to design a new global economic system in the abstract. There are 7 billion people on the planet, and the entire planet, for the most part, is defined by this existing capitalist system dominated by certain nations in the industrial world. Okay. The transition out of that is going to be long, and it will be marked less by, I think, somebody coming up with a grand plan, and marked more by experiments. So to give you an example, the worker cooperative movement, I think, is one of the most heartening of those examples. These are people who believe that creating truly democratic workplaces, places where workers own and manage a firm rather than working in a corporate hierarchy, is one way to start to experiment. We have such a project here in Austin, Texas, where I live, around the country, and in fact around the world. Are worker cooperatives themselves defining a brand new economic system? No, but they are giving people an opportunity to experiment with other ways of organizing economic activity and other ways of understanding who we are in relationship to each other in this economic work we do.
So trade unions and cooperatives.
Sure, worker co-ops, traditional trade unions can have a great effect. Community-based organizations that organize a variety of activities, from community gardens to community-supported agriculture. All sorts of things are happening. I don't want to be naive. None of them by themselves are a solution. But as you pointed out, there's no guarantee there is a solution. We can see in individual terms how people make such a mess of their lives they never really recover. Well, it's quite possible the human species has made such a mess of our collective life that we can't fully recover in the sense that we might want to. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that nothing is possible. It means, I think, that we should probably give up on these grand notions that one person or one movement alone can create the perfect world. I'm not big on utopias. I think they are usually an impediment to, rather than a vehicle toward, real progress.
What if you combine a utopia with whatever practical work is coming along? Because I see utopias as people that believe that the system has to be structurally changed, that
Sure.
by changing a little bit here and becoming recycling and doing this and that, it's not really going to solve the problem, but rather perpetuate the system, capitalist system, because it in a way it aids it and makes it more viable. For instance, I've heard the argument about Ford, the Ford company in the States, that apparently the management decided to pay well the workers so they could buy their own cars and grow the economy. Now, some critics of that system say, well, that is what is prolonging the capitalist system. That's what is making it continue, because we are helping it, we're enabling capitalism to continue, and instead of having a radical change. So that radical change would be what you're saying, a utopia.
Yeah, well, I think we should distinguish between a radical analysis of the problem, which I would endorse, and utopian claims that somehow there is a perfect system out there. I believe very much that the existing system of capitalism in nation states simply cannot continue indefinitely. And I would argue that those fundamental systems do have to change.
Mm-hmm. But you see the argument between the utopians and practical enablers of capitalism.
Yes, but I'm saying that that's a false alternative. That let's not confuse radical analysis with utopian thinking. That one can be radical in one's critique of the system that exists without believing that one can design a perfect system. And utopia is usually associated with the notion that there is somehow a perfect system out there that we can achieve. I simply don't believe human beings are perfectible in that way.
You don't think that labor unions and cooperative movements are a perfect system?
No,
in a
I don't
way,
think any humans.
Nothing is perfect, but in a way,
no, not even close to. I don't think it makes sense to think about perfect human systems, because I don't think it makes sense to think about human beings as perfect. If by perfect we mean an ability to meet our own stated moral principles, I know of no one who's capable of doing that, myself included. Therefore, what we want to do is try to design systems that understand and anticipate our own weaknesses and accommodate them when possible. But nobody knows enough to know what that system should look like. All we can do is come together with a sense of collective obligation and collective joy, in a sense, and do this work. And people have been doing it for centuries and will continue to do it.
Robert, let me ask you one last question here, and that is in regards to money. And some old religions, they used to chastise money, specifically interest on money, as usury. Usury is
Yes.
it was a sin, and I've heard some economists that say the problem with capitalism is not money itself, but it's the interest rate, the interest that you make with money. In other words, money begetting money. That's the problem. Do you think that that would be is a utopia maybe to think that the abolition of interest rates, if governments could create their own agencies to create the money at 0% interest, and we pay through taxes the operations of that system, do you think that would be a possible alternative to capitalism?
Well, certainly the concept of interest and the idea that a class of people will enrich themselves not by contributing productive work, but by simply manipulating systems, that is inconsistent with any decent human community. So I agree that interest is usury, usury is sin in that traditional sense.
Can you envision a society where there is no money, that people just contribute, as Karl Marx said, contribute with what you're capable of and receive whatever you need?
Well, not only can I envision it, but of course, most of human history was lived without money. So it's not something one has to speculate about. It means that we can recognize that human experience on this planet is varied. And when people say, well, it's impossible to do without money, it's impossible to arrange an economic system that doesn't appeal to people's greed, well, that's contradicted by human experience, in which we have had periods where those were not the norm. So anything is possible in that sense. The real question is really, can we overcome the barriers that have been created, the concentrated wealth, the already severe attack on the ecosystems of the planet? We can arrange ourselves in any number of ways. The real question is, do we have the time and do we have the resources, not only the physical resources, but the moral resources to overcome these incredibly corrosive hierarchical systems? On that, I don't have an answer. It's certainly possible. It's not necessarily likely, but the fact that it is possible means we should continue to work at it.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Robert. I wish you well.
Thank you. Very interesting conversation.
Okay.
I appreciate it.